Luxicult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
Foxtrot 3, Roth 2, 4, Yankee, Roth 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec, Oscar, 5, Tango, Papa, 3, Delta, Juliet, Mike, Sierra, Victor, Charlie, Kilo, Victor, Charlie, Gold, Mainville Island.
When it's 3:30 in the morning, right through to break of day, a phantom DJ opens up for the dead to come and play. The colored lights are flashing and the crowd are on their feet, but there's no sound of them dancing to the ghostly disco beat. When there's ice between your shoulders and the hairs rise on your neck, and you don't know who you're dancing with at the haunted discotheque. When you daren't look at your partner and you fear their bony hand, the go-go ghosts all boogie to an ancient, nameless band. The graveyard sounds are all around, the mist drifts everywhere, but the ghastly crowds in mini shrouds rave on without a care. When there's ice between your shoulders and the hairs rise on your neck, and you know you'll dance forever at the haunted discotheque. That is The Haunted Disco by Adrian Henry. Hello and welcome to Luxicult. This is the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and also discuss a variety of occult, esoteric, and adjacent concepts, exploring the intersections of magic, science, art, philosophy, technology, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic. This is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. People can, will, and should disagree sometimes with the things that I or my guests say on the show. How we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things all the time after all. Unlike those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I can and often do revise my opinions or thoughts about things based on new evidence. Very excited to share this first episode of 2025 with you all. My first guest today is author Howard Roth, who shared about his new book, The Forbidden Knowledge of the Book of Enoch, The Watchers, Nephilim, Fallen Angels, and the End of the World, which is part of the Weiser Enochian Library. So we're going to get into the magical and historical significance of this biblical text, Book of Enoch. We're also going to get into the stories and the magic in the text, and we're going to talk about how evil came to the world, which is kind of different from the story that we hear in Genesis. We're going to talk about name magic and Harold's other book, The Magic of the Sword of Moses, and much more. There's a lot of really fun stuff in this conversation. During the episode within the episode, I will sit down with Bruce from Pink Disco Magazine to talk about their recent issue, The Devil Card, and we'll talk a little bit about the pieces that I made to contribute to that, as well as about the devil as an archetype. Lots of awesome stuff to get into here today. First, let me quickly remind you that if you like the show and the other work I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me. There's no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is also an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation. Thank you so much to everybody who is doing this stuff. Your support literally makes this show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, thereby justifying to myself the not inconsiderable amount of time I spend. Especially now with the project of moving houses going on, this is even more of a help. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be making this thing. Although I'm a pretty introverted person and I don't use social media more than I have to because of this, I'm not there like checking on stuff every day or anything like that. But that certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from y'all. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing listeners, collaborators, cohorts, co-conspirators, and whatnot. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com. You can get me on Instagram at luxoccultpod or on Blue Sky at luxastrata, Luxastrata. Allow me to set the table for you here. Harold Roth is an author and artist and among the foremost authorities on plants within the modern occult community. He has studied Hebrew as well as Jewish mysticism and magic for decades. He's also the author of The Magic of the Sword of Moses and The Witching Herbs. Harold teaches classes on botanical magic, Kabbalah, and witchcraft, or has in the past. You can find him at haroldroth.com. All right, I'll be back during a break to introduce the episode within the episode, and after the interview, we'll do listener mail and shout-outs. I'll also share an update about what we have going on with the Green Mushroom Project, a large-scale group working which you can be a part of, as well as Void House, our newest adventure in creating consent-forward spaces for magical work, both in person and online, providing consent education to magically inclined people, and investigating the magical healing and alchemical properties of consent. Speaking of which, a content warning about today's episode. We're going to be discussing a biblical text in a historical context today, and as some people might be aware, there's some pretty rough and disturbing stuff in those old books sometimes. There's going to be discussions which touch lightly on the topics of abuse and sexual assault and other biblical unpleasantness. We keep things pretty light in the conversation, but those topics do come up in passing, so please choose to listen or not based on whatever you think will be best for you and your day. Much love. All right, fuck yeah, for those of you still here, let's get into it. Here's the first part of my chat with Harold Roth.
It's a machine that hasn't been built yet. It still remains on the verge of my perception. But I will build this machine. I do not climb in. And I will transport myself in the direction of liberation.
All right, well, my guest today is Harold Roth. Harold, how's it going?
Pretty good. How's it going with you?
Going pretty well. I'm really excited to talk with you about your new book, The Forbidden Knowledge of the Book of Enoch. And
Me
hopefully
too.
we'll get to the magic of the Sword of Moses as well.
Okay, good.
So I'd like to give my guests a chance to give a little bit of whatever context you would like to provide to the listeners and I about yourself before we get into all this cool material here.
Okay. When I first left home, I was 17 and I was already interested in magic. I got a tarot deck when I was like 16. But then I discovered, these different kind of practices. Like I read Paul Huston's book on witchcraft and I was like, well, it can't be a witch because it can't afford a, big sword and have it engraved. Then I came across the Blue Equinox book in this little underground shop in Chicago, and I was like, holy crap. But I think it was like ridiculous price would it be now. I think it was like $50, and I was like, oh God, I'll never be able to afford that. Anyway, so I looked around for different things, and one thing I was really fascinated by was any kind of art that was used for magic, especially sigils or pentagrams, anything that was used as a tool. And some of the cool ones I found were associated with Kabbalah. So I didn't know anything about Kabbalah at all. In fact, I didn't know anything about magic. I mean, I went to the Chicago Public Library and the big old black book of by D. Lawrence, I think it was, called Hindu Magic or something. It was very, Orientalist type book. And so that was pretty much it. But I found all of these Kabbalistic diagrams, and then I had asked my apartment landlord if I could paint the walls. He said, sure. So what I did was I just put Kabbalistic symbols all over the walls of my studio. But that's kind of how I started out, was being attracted to the graphic aspect. And of course, wanting, probably like most people interested in magic, wanting some kind of entryway into understanding a hidden world. And to, in that understanding, coming to not necessarily have control over it, but to have control over my interaction with it, to not just be a little thing that's being just tossed around by the world. So basically, that's how I got into magic. And then years later, I opened a shop where I sold magical stuff, and I ran it, stuff I made, incense and oils and seeds of plants that I grew. And I ran that shop for 20 years, supported myself with that. I did, a customer approached me after I'd been doing that for about 5 years and asked me if I'd be interested in writing a book about herbs and magic. And I said, well, yeah, I've been working on one for like 3 years. We can't seem to finish it. But working with her and Wiser, she was and is an editor for Wiser. I was able to write The Witching Herbs, which is, as far as I know, the first book on baneful plants in witchcraft. And that did well. So then the next one I did was The Sword of Moses, because that one was one I had actually seen in the 70s. Probably about 72, I went with some friends to the University of Chicago Public Library. Not public, what am I saying? Anyways, we got in there, and they went to look at the history books, and I went to look for the occult section. And I saw this little gray hardback, and it was called The Sword of Moses, and it was like a Jewish magic book. And I was like, holy shit, this is so good. I have to be able to do this. And I opened it up, and I saw that all of the divine names he had basically X'd out. This is the Moses Gaster translation. And because he didn't want, later I found out, he didn't want people using it to make magic. He thought it was blasphemous, I guess. But that was my inspiration for years later, wanting to write about the Sword of Moses, because I researched it. I found that there were scholars who were working on a new translation, and it just got me really excited, and I wanted to do it. So I did. And then the one that just came out, the Book of Enoch, was a topic actually suggested to me by Wiser. And I didn't know anything about the Book of Enoch, but I learned. And I was just really, it's just like at the center of so many things going on at the time. And say from about 300 BCE to about 100, well, even up until now. Okay. So, and I really enjoy how much people still want to use that book. So that got me really into that. So I guess that was a lot of wind about it.
Right on. No, that makes total sense. Thank you. And I'm glad that we kind of unpacked like your perspective on coming to this, because I think a lot of the listeners might be familiar with the word Enoch as in Enochian magic. Shout out to you, Cliff, from Enochian Today. We've talked about this on the show today, but the forbidden knowledge in the Book of Enoch that you're able to like kind of unpack through like looking at, I'm assuming, translations and things like that, is about magic, but it's not about the what's called Enochian magic by like Dee and Kelly. So I'm curious to kind of get into that today. Would you mind, for people who aren't familiar with what the Book of Enoch is, giving us a little bit of background there?
Sure. Book of Enoch is a combination of like 5 different books. The main one that we are familiar with is the Book of the Watchers. And it was written about 300 BCE in the land of Israel by someone Jewish. And it was written in Jewish Babylonian Aramaic. It was very popular at the time up until probably about 200 CE. Various people really, because it has this whole wonderful story that probably most people are familiar with about the Watchers, who were a group of angels and whose regular job was to guide certain stars. And they looked down from their places, great up in the heavens, and saw women. And they decided they wanted to go down to earth and have sex with them. And they did. Okay, but first, one of their leaders said, okay, you all got to swear that you're going to do this with me, because I'm not going to take all the blame when we get
We're all in this together, right?
Exactly. And so they all go down. They swear, yes. And they all go down, and it doesn't exactly go into detail about what happens, but they take women as their wives. Now, that could mean a bunch of different things. And if you want to talk about the women thing, I would be really happy to do that. And I'll just skip over it for now.
We should get back to it. Hell yeah.
Definitely. And they enjoyed themselves. but they also brought various forbidden knowledge to humans. And some of them kind of overlap with like the inventions of alchemy. That's what I thought of right away when I read the list. But also, I guess, Prometheus and some other guy, Lucifer, maybe, I don't know. It seems to be fairly common in a group of cultures that a supernatural entity comes down to earth and gives people knowledge related to fire. So like for the Watchers, they brought down the knowledge of how to make armor, how to make weapons of metal, but also how to make dyes and makeup, jewelry. What else Then they also brought other straight up magical practices like cursing, spells of various sorts. There's a meme that Christian fundies send around the net periodically, and it shows a baby in somebody's womb. It's a drawing, of course, and there's a forceps coming at the baby, right? And it quotes something. It says from the book of Enoch, but they completely mangle it up. They say in the book of Enoch, it was predicted, in quotation marks, that they would strike the fetus in its mother's womb. Okay. But the thing is, they say this is about abortion, right? That's what the fundies say.
Yes, they say a lot of things, but yes.
Right? Yeah, abortion with forceps was predicted in the book of Enoch in 300 BC. Anyways, they completely turned it around because it's not about cursing somebody. It's about, the danger of losing your baby, okay? A baby that you want. And it's like baby protection magic. So it's been a big, huge thing. And
infant mortality has always been a huge thing for our species, especially for a long time. I mean, infant mortality rates are lower, I think, today than they have been for. It's always been a huge thing. Like babies of any species are delicate things. So this makes sense. Yeah.
Yep. It makes total sense. And I think I read somewhere like a third of all Jewish amulets were and are baby. Protect the mother, protect the baby type amulets. At any rate, but they wouldn't have been so anxious to protect the babies they had because they ended up having giants, the women did, and they were terrible. Okay. Now, I know that nowadays there are people who work with the Nephilim. I don't know what they do exactly. Okay. But they work with them as figures of power. That's how I imagine it. I haven't really looked into that part, but when you read the actual book of Enoch, they don't have any redeemable qualities.
Okay, so the Nephilim are the offspring between the women and these Watchers. Okay.
And they kind of get conflated in this weird way with the Giborim, which means great ones. And they were also giants, but they were sometimes, it's more metaphorical for them. It's like they were great warriors or leaders or kings or something like that. But it's not a very murky definition, but that's the one that was translated into the Greek copies of the book of Enoch. And so that kind of got the whole thing about them being actual giants, I don't know, or their color, that kind of stuff is not known. Some people have told me that in the versions they've heard about the Nephilim, that they are black. There's no description of their color. Okay. Anyway, so they are these rapacious, and I use that word advisedly, because they not only kill all the animals and start killing all the people, but they rape them as well. And they eat them alive. So and they make wars. When they used up all the people and the animals, they start killing each other and eating each other alive. And so the archangels,
they're basically just the worst.
Yeah, they sure are. You cannot find anything, because also they're not the ones who brought magic to humans. The ones who did that were the Watchers. And the Watchers brought the ability the knowledge of how to understand the wind, any kind of weather phenomenon, things like volcanoes, so like earth magic, any kind of stuff like stars for omens, how to read them as omens. And now you do find out along the way that a lot of these things, these knowledge bases, were specialties of the Babylonian exorcist priests. And I don't know how much you know about Jewish history, but Jews were exiled, or I shouldn't say Jews, I should say the hotshots of Jerusalem had been exiled to Babylon after the conquest by the Babylonians. And they were there for like 160 years or something. So, and they came back, not all of them, but a lot of them did, bringing back different kinds of knowledge, including a lot of types of divination. So some people have argued that the gifts that the angels, the watchers, brought were the same ones that the exorcist priests in Babylon had.
So this casts a little bit of a political light on what could be going on here for sure. Okay, cool.
Definitely. There's like this whole thing where you can read the Book of Enoch in some ways as a critique of Babylon. And that wouldn't be weird. I mean, Babylon didn't have a good reputation at the time. But this gets so bad that these archangels say to God, why aren't you doing anything about these Nephilim? And look what they did. And God's like, oh yeah, I need to wait a minute. So
oh yeah, that's happening.
Yeah, really. It's like they even kind of scold him and say things like the dead of the earth are crying out to you. And he just is sort of like, okay. But
okay.
guess I better get off my butt. And he does send the flood. Okay. Now, yeah, so there.
I'll fix it.
Yeah, really. I'll just wipe them all out and start over. Basically, that was his idea. And the only one who was preserved was Noah and his family. And all the rest were killed. Except he couldn't kill the watchers because they were immortal. But he instead had them chained up, or the archangels did this, chained them up in underground caves or something, tombs. I mean, it's hard to, a pit lined with rocks. Okay. And then the Nephilim, they just were straight up killed, but he left 10%. So like after they were killed, their spirits came out, and God left 10% of them to wreak havoc on the earth and annoy human beings and tempt them to become idol worshipers and stuff.
Thanks, God.
Yeah, really. This is kind of interesting because there's two kinds of tension in this book. One is, if you think about it, it flies right in the face of the Adam and Eve story. The Adam and Eve story says that evil was created on earth by human beings, but the Book of Enoch says evil was brought to earth by the angels. They were the ones who committed the first sins. So it's kind of, whoa, and the allowing of 10% of the evil spirits of the Nephilim to live and, harass human beings is also God being part of that evil, just as the Watchers were, they were divine spirits. So it's kind of, to me, that was really interesting because it's a much more complicated view of how evil comes about.
Yeah, absolutely. At least we're still blaming women, though. We haven't gone
I know. It totally lets off evil, though the later versions or the later tellings of the Watcher story become anti-women as they go along. The original story that just says the two main Watchers bring down these gifts of knowledge, and they just give them two human beings. And it's worded something like, and they shared them with women and with men. Okay, so nobody's, but the later versions say that they shared these things like makeup and dyes for clothing and hair dye and jewelry. They shared those, and women took them up and used them to corrupt men. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think I feel a Greek touch in there somewhere. You know what I mean? It's
sure. Absolutely. And it's interesting. There's a lot to unpack here for sure.
At any rate, so there was like, I think about, 3 or 4 different versions of the Watcher story in the Book of Enoch, but it's the first book that is the main one, and it is the one that we remember. The other books that are in it have more to do with the end of the world, okay, and what that will mean, what's going to happen then, and that sort of thing. But that was one of the reasons why it was so popular, was because people just, and I think it's partly why it's so popular now, people felt this uneasiness, this doom. And, here was the book that was saying, well, we have these forbidden knowledges, but in the end, God's going to come down, he's going to sort everything out, and we're going to get a do-over. And we're going to get, a heavenly temple that's pure. It's not like with a bunch of guys who were hiding their asses in Babylon and learning all these bad things, and then brought them back, changed everything in the temple, wrecked the calendar, yada, yada, yada. So it was popular for that reason, but it was also the reason why it became not banned, but simply wasn't recopied anymore, and nobody talked about it anymore, and it didn't become part of the canon for the church or for Judaism. Well, only one part of the church, was because it did say that evil came from heaven, and that became unacceptable. Just sort of, interesting before, but
Yeah.
the
It kind
Adam
of
and
suggests
Eve
that it's like part of the general scheme of things rather than something that we created, right?
right. There's still no original sin or fallen or battle in the heaven in Judaism. It's all like these angels came down of their own free will. They wasn't because, I guess you could say they were prideful, but more like it's presented as if they just couldn't follow orders. They had a job and they just left those jobs, and guiding the stars, and they just left them to go fuck around, literally, right? So it was really important, and then, like I said, it just got dropped. So by the time I think about 300, by that time it was out of Christianity, and it was in Christianity longer than it was in Judaism. And the only church that preserved it was the Ethiopic church, which was isolated. And that's probably the reason why they could, because they were like in this little part, no, I shouldn't say, but little, in this part of Africa that was kind of cut off from the Byzantine church.
They just didn't get the memo that it had been cut maybe or something. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is they also had a different version of it that's much longer, and so it had been added to, but if it wasn't for that, Western Christians would never have repopularized it. So like they heard about this book, and that's what Dee heard about, and he was really interested in it, I think, because of the whole forbidden knowledge things. And there's a whole book in it called the astronomical book. And it is all about astronomy and calendar and stuff like that. And it not the kind of calendar that was used then pretty much anywhere. It was like an older one, or they couldn't really figure out where it came from. So it was interesting for that reason. But Dee, when he supposedly never really got it, he never really saw it. He saw something that was presented to him as if it was the Book of Enoch, and it wasn't. So but you can see where the idea of angels coming down and giving you this secret knowledge would be, that's definitely, I think, part of Enochian magic, that idea. And in his practice, his partner even recommended switching wives. So
Yeah, the angels told me that I should fuck your wife, okay?
yeah, right. I didn't believe that. I was like, what did Dee do when he heard that?
If I recall correctly, Kelly was like missing an ear, like that he had gotten in trouble for like fraud for some type of fraud or something like I don't know. It's a very
I can
it's a very
believe
funny
that.
story.
He was very slick, I think. But at any rate, Lon Milo Duquette said that from his perspective, the Book of Enoch didn't have anything to do with Enochian magic. And I believe him. And I couldn't see. I mean, I looked and I could not see that there were any connections. And it's interesting. There's a word for the type of Judaism that was involved with the Book of Enoch, and it's called Enochic Judaism. But when you talk about the magic, it's Enochian. So it's kind of a little bit signal there, you know?
Sure.
So, yeah, that's my big, long talk about it.
Well, maybe we should just mention real quick who Enoch was.
Oh, right. Enoch was a prophet. He went and sat down by the river, and he knew he was one that was received a prophecy from God that the world was going to be destroyed. And I can't remember if Noah was Noah was his grandson. I can't remember if it was his son or his grandson. And Noah was a very special person. He was born being able to talk. And in fact, there was some worry by his father that Noah was actually partly one of the Nephilim, because he was born with all this maturity, although he's described as if he was an albino, like white hair and bright eyes, which could mean anything. But anyhow, Enoch learned about the whole thing with the Nephilim, because the Watchers came and asked him if he would go to heaven, because they found out, okay, well, we had our fun, we got all the Nephilim, they're eating up the world, okay? And we want to go back home now. But God said, no, you're not coming back. And I'm gonna have the angels lock you up in rocks. And the Watchers went to Enoch and said, will you ask God to forgive us? And Enoch said, okay. And he did, and he went up there, and God told him no. Okay. That he was not going to. And so he had to go back and tell the Watchers that, and they were very upset. But the thing about that trip is, in the Hebrew Bible, there's like one line about Enoch. And it's something like, and Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, because God took him. So there's the idea that Enoch was one of the only human beings who is actually lifted up physically to heaven. And then there's this whole mythology after the Book of Enoch. Part of it's in the Book of Enoch, like he gets to see all these places all over the world. The angels teach him all this knowledge. And when the angels teach it, it's good. When the Watchers, the good angels, when the archangels teach him, this is good knowledge. But when the Watchers teach people, it's considered bad. Same exact topics. And he also gets to come back to Earth for a while, like 3 years. And then he goes back up to heaven, where he lives forever after. But after the Book of Enoch is over, he gets transformed into this angel called Metatron. And that angel is the biggest one, the biggest angel. And so for Christians and for people who were not Jewish, the cool thing about that was it was proof that you didn't have to be Jewish to go to heaven. Okay? You didn't have to abide by all these laws and stuff like that, because Enoch wasn't circumcised. There was, he was before Abraham. So there was no law. It was appealed especially, it appealed especially to people who were who were having issues with Jewish law and the way that it was being applied in the temple by the priests who were running things. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they didn't, a lot of people didn't think that the priests of the temple were applying the laws harshly enough. So,
Yeah, fundamentalism crops up everywhere, doesn't it?
exactly,
Yes.
so yeah, the thing about the book that's really interesting to me was how many ways, how many different little layers did it speak to? And I think that's kind of true now too, because now I would see people saying the Nephilim or the Watchers are from outer space. Okay.
I was just gonna ask about that because I know
Yeah.
that people are gonna be wondering hearing some of these
Yeah.
like things. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I believe in UFOs. Okay, I do. I believe they're aliens. Yes. I don't believe they built the pyramids. I don't believe that the vision of Ezekiel with the wheel within a wheel was a spaceship. I don't believe that the Watchers were aliens. I think we're perfectly capable of coming up with these things all by ourselves. We don't need any help, you know.
Yeah,
And
I think
also,
there's some problematic things when we really start to unpack that sort of ancient aliens, History Channel type narratives about like,
yeah,
how did these people who weren't white do these amazing things? Like, I
exactly.
don't know. Like, so yeah.
I mean, can they use geometry? No.
So yeah, but and I don't think as you sort of mentioned and hit on, like there's all kinds of like if we really get into the context into which these things were written, there's all kinds of other explanations about like politics and where does knowledge come from, and that being like whether if it's coming through the system to you, then it's and safe and good, but if you're getting it from some other source that could be subverting that system of power, then it's bad and evil. So yes.
Foreign. Because that could be more foreign than angels, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
They're not even human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Foxtrot 3, Romeo 2, 2, 4, Yankee, Romeo 7, Bravo, Delta, Quebec.
Greetings, it is I, Luxa from the future. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We're going to be getting back to the rest of my chat with Harold Roth in a little while here. After the break, I will ask Harold about the magic in the Book of Enoch, and we'll talk about the wives' role in the book, and get into name magic with the Sword of Moses. Harold will tell me a bit about how the divine names are derived, which is super interesting. There's some adjacency with sigil tech there, which is super cool. One thing that I found really interesting about Harold's book and about our discussion so far was the degree to which cosmetics and stuff were considered magic and witchcraft. This has come up on the show before in the episode with Sophie St. Thomas, and this will actually come up again later. We sort of take glamour and cosmetics and things like that so for granted in our culture nowadays, but there's been a really interesting and complex conversation with how we look at magic, makeup and cosmetics, women, witches, and the rest of it. My own explorations into glamour magic have in a lot of ways been about learning to see myself differently and learning to express different aspects of my personality or character or self or whatever. There's also the thing where a lot of people who grew up in the maniac diet culture of like the 80s or 90s or aughts or whatever sometimes have some battle scars in the form of things like body image issues or things like that. I remember at one point in my life I used to have so much like anxiety about my body and people like seeing my butt that I would have like literal stress dreams about, being naked places. And I think this is pretty common actually. But it feels incredibly liberating to have worked through that stuff to the point where I now like enjoy putting pictures of my butt out there sometimes in certain small areas of the internet. Doing stuff like that was something that I always had a sort of like deep and secret desire to do. And this desire was tangled up with a lot of that fear and anxiety. So there was some really interesting and powerful magical opportunities involved for myself in like breaking that taboo that I had put on myself and that society or whatever. I suppose it's a little taboo in general to put, racy pictures of yourself out there on the internet or give them to your friends or even to like take them of yourself or whatever. But it also seems like everybody's doing it. So maybe it's not that taboo. It's hard to figure out. Or maybe that just tells you something about my algorithms if I think everybody's doing it. It's hard to parse out. Anyway, the work I contributed to Pink Disco's Devil Card issue is a great example of something that I used to think would be totally impossible for me to create, but that I always wanted to. Through a lot of hard work in my magical and artistical practices, and definitely in therapy too, I was able to recognize that the proverbial devil's chains which held me back from pursuing these interests were mostly in my own mind. like the figures in the Rider-Waite Coleman Smith Devil card. I could cast them off, but it had to be my own choice to do so. All right, on this note, let's go ahead and jump into my chat with Bruce from Pink Disco Magazine about their recent Devil card issue. Afterwards, I will play you audio from one of my submissions. This is a really cool conversation. We hit a lot of ground, and there's also some notes about contribution. So if you're out there listening and you're curious about putting some of your work out there, here is an opportunity to do so. All right, cheers. Here's my chat with Bruce from Pink Disco Magazine.
Sierra, Victor, Charlie, Kilo, Victor, Charlie, Gold, Mainville.
All right, well, my guest today is Bruce from Pink Disco Magazine. Bruce, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you doing, Lexa?
Going pretty well, pretty well. I'm excited to talk about this publication and all of what goes into it. So for people that aren't familiar, can you tell us a little bit about Pink Disco and the mission that you all are up to over there?
Yeah, totally. Pink Disco Magazine, it's an online journal. We publish quarterly. We publish every equinox and solstice, so one issue per season. We've been going for 2 years now. And the idea was, and it's an arts and literature magazine, I should probably say that, but the idea of starting it, really, like when I conceived of this magazine, I had no idea what kind of response there would be, what kind of audience there might be for something like this. But I really wanted to do something where we could feature art and literature from contributors that were interested in expressing issues around sexuality and around the body, and just a place to celebrate that. I just, of all of the literature magazines out there, and there are tons, both in print and online, I really wasn't seeing any space that was exclusively dedicated to sexuality and to issues around the body in a way that was not always sexual, though it can sometimes be, and we certainly welcome that, but really as a means of just understanding human desire and understanding human connection and understanding our relationships with our own bodies and the beauty of all of that, as well as some of the ugliness or the uncertainty or the insecurity around that. And so we really just wanted to create a space where those conversations were happening and where we could highlight different artists that were also thinking about these different issues and were writing about these different issues or creating art around these different issues. And like I said, we've been going 2 years now, and it's been growing, and we're really, really proud of what we've created here.
Yeah, very cool. There's kind of something a little bit maybe subversive or like saying the quiet part out loud about this project. I think that the body and sexuality, it's such a huge motivating factor in art and other places, even just psychologically for us. But, it's such a thing that is so subverted and taboo in so many different societies and contexts. So having that space and really kind of shining a light on it is really interesting. Very cool.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know. I like to think we're a little bit punk rock.
But yeah, I'm curious about if there's been any pushback against this project.
There really hasn't been, and maybe it's because we're just kind of, again, we're kind of this little misfit magazine, and the publication world is wide, and it's there are always projects like this, like what we're doing, very different from aesthetically from what we're doing, but the magazines that are always coming and going, and so the landscape is always changing and undulating, and I think that we are able to sort of navigate below the surface a little bit, which is really, really advantageous. So we really haven't gotten any pushback. And, the people that are paying attention to what we're doing are paying attention because they're interested, right? You're probably not going to stumble upon Pink Disco unless you are seeking out something that's aesthetically in the vein of what we're doing, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can we talk a little bit about the name?
Yeah, totally. Names are kind of fucking weird, man. with it, like I said, there's a lot of different magazines, a lot of different intellectual properties out there that exist. And so when I was trying to brainstorm different names, so honestly, like it was kind of happenstance in the way in which the name and the title kind of came together. I was exploring a lot of different possibilities and just finding that, a lot of my initial efforts, there were already properties out there that had claimed those titles. So I was like really just kind of pushing together different words that didn't have what's the word I'm looking for? It didn't really have a pre-existing sort of connection, right? But by smashing them together, it's kind of creating something new. And so Pink Disco just really kind of came out of that effort of just brainstorming. And it was just, nothing completely esoteric about it, other than the fact that it's just kind of a moment of inspiration, and it's stuck, and it really has defined our aesthetic in a lot of ways. So I think if we look at those two words, like the pink, really, to me, like pink is it's a color of sexuality, it's a color of celebration, it's a color of softness, it's a color of exploration, and then disco is vibrancy and it's fun. And so it's really just kind of trying to create an atmosphere that is inviting both of those two different things and putting those things together and those two different energies together.
Yeah, I love that. Very cool. Yeah, there's a little bit of a synchronicity in the disco name for me too. Disco is a name that I've played with for myself actually in the sort of like Latin way of thinking about it. There's a saying that the Romans had that goes audio, video, disco, and it means I listen, I watch, I learn. And the idea of disco being this thing that's like this party, this dance, this like, kind of kitschy 1970s, we all know what disco is, hopefully, but that also being like this word that literally means I learn. And the idea that learning can be this like really fun, glittery, awesome process is something that I really enjoy. And yeah, fuck yeah.
That's awesome. I wasn't even aware of that connection there. And so like, yeah, that's awesome. I dig that. I'll have to think on that a little bit more.
Very cool. So I guess maybe in that vein of I learned, like what have you learned from going on this journey with this project so far?
Yeah, it's been awesome. I've learned, like one of the things that really, anytime I think you create an artistic enterprise in which you're inviting other people to participate in that, the vision in which you might initially have over time becomes a little bit, it takes different shapes, right? Because you have different voices in the room that are shaping that. And so that's been, for me, like what I initially conceived of was certainly one thing. And I think that we're not far off the mark of where that is. But a lot of what I've come to understand or have to do is allow myself to be vulnerable enough and receptive enough to allow Pink Disco to take different forms and different shapes, not necessarily by my own intention and purpose, but really through the collective experience of like all of these different contributors and all of these different artists. So that's been a really, really cool experience. One of the things that I've come to learn about what I want Pink Disco to be, and one of the ways in which I pride what we're doing, and how I think it differentiates from some other similar publications, is that I really want it to feel like a community. So all of our contributors, those that choose to still participate and be active, we engage with them on a pretty regular basis. When contributors send in their work, most of the time, if we're interested in it and responding to it, I take the time, like there's something that's catching fire in my reading of it or my ingestion of it. And so I try to respond to that. Because I'm also, in addition to being an editor, I'm a writer myself. And so I understand that process and that insecurity that sometimes can accompany the process of blindly sending your work that can feel very, very personal into the ether and wait for someone to respond to it. And so we try to be really, really cognizant of that and responsive to all of the different contributors and the different artists. So I read every fucking thing that comes our way. Most of the stuff I respond to everything, but most of the stuff I'll respond with a very personal note of like, this is what I'm really responding to. And some of the stuff that we look at and we just don't have the space to publish it, either because it's not fitting with our themes or with what our conception of this particular issue is, or if it's not really talking to the other pieces in the issue. Like sometimes I'll respond and say, I really love what you're doing here and here and here. Here's what we're looking for. I'd love to see more of your work. And this is ways in which you can kind of shape that to fit our aesthetic if you're interested in contributing. So yeah, so that piece of community is super important. And I think that, again, I think because we are a magazine that is so narrowly focused on a very specific aspect of what it means to be a person and a human and embodying a body and to have a sexuality, because we are so occupying such a niche space that we have a decent amount of submissions, but we also, it's small enough that I can respond very personally to everything. And that's what I really love. And I really love being able to just talk to different artists and kind of see what their interests are and where they're at in their different processes, and be a part of that journey and be a part of that conversation that they're having, and creating a space where we can highlight and show off what they're doing. So it's been a really cool, it's an ever-changing learning experience. This is kind of a serendipitous timing because, right now we're 2 days from the Christmas holiday, which is when we first launched Pink Disco and started accepting submissions, was 2 years ago, almost to the day. So,
wow, okay, very cool.
Yeah, so it's been a really, really awesome process. And so, yeah, it's been great of just being able to kind of see like where we started and where we've gotten to. And I feel like this last issue that just released earlier this week has really been kind of a culmination of what we've been building towards. I'm really, really proud of this particular issue. And we got some ideas for next year that I think, and a lot of it's trial and error for us, we're not a money generating publication. That's not really what we're interested in or about. The little money that we get is from tips and donations exclusively, and it goes right back into the project. And it's really just like, it's about creating that space and creating a place for art to thrive and exist. And so, a lot of we got some different ideas of things that we're wanting to launch for next year, but it's all going to be trial and error, and we'll see what kind of sticks and what people are responding to. And we love that experimental nature of being able to do that. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And yeah.
Very cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate that you all were able to include some of my work for the Devil card issue. I'm really excited about having the opportunity to revisit the Devil card archetype. And it's also serendipitous timing, as we move into Capricorn season, the Devil card is like Saturn in Capricorn.
Right.
So I played around a lot with those types of energies. And yeah, it was a really cool experience to sort of, as I said, revisit that archetype and look at some of the ways that, what are the chains that are helping, keeping me from, progressing onward? Where is the devil showing up for me in my life? And where can I really dive in and explore that and see what that's about so I can overcome it, hopefully. And so, yeah, I was a little bit nervous about what I contributed, but I'm also really excited about it too. So thank you for having that space.
Yeah, no, thank you for participating in that. I'm curious, how was that? How was that, putting that together for this?
It was interesting. The spoken word piece that I included for the video was something that kind of showed up for me, fully formed, as these types of poetry sometimes does that for me. It kind of arrives and almost fully formed, and I'm like, okay. It's this piece where I'm speaking as another character, and it's sort of really indulging in this revenge fantasy, almost this Dungeons and Dragons, like necromancer fantasy where you're vanquishing your enemies and then being celebrated for the victory, and then you're raising them from the dead so that they can serve you in the undead afterlife or whatever. Just like really kind of, things that I've been definitely, conditioned to like repress those types and I mean probably for good reason, most of us have. But
Right.
those types of things that can we look at them? Can we explore them? Can we give them their due and figure out what's going on there? This is sometimes contextualized as like shadow work. Can we find a way to like,
Right.
integrate them, right? Can we make friends with them in a way that they're no longer causing friction and problems, but we're able to learn something and maybe they're able to serve us, much like our supposed enemies in the piece that I wrote. So,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love that piece, man. It's awesome. And that's one of the reasons I was really excited to have you as a contributor, because a lot of your work, it's working on so many different sensorial levels, right? So I really enjoy the multimedia aspect of, we have visual imagery, we have spoken word, we have music, we have all of these different components coming together. So that was really awesome. And the other thing that I thought was that you touched upon that I totally agree with, and this is one of the reasons why I was really excited to do this particular issue, is I find the devil archetype to be just really fascinating. And, culturally, we have this collective fear or anxiety around that figure and around those types of energies, but they can be really healing and really educational and really insightful at the same time. And I think that, Capricorn season is just like such a fascinating time to really kind of burrow into your own skin and explore those different aspects of those different things that are holding us back or that are constraining us in order for us to move forward. So, I that was one of the things I was looking for in all of these different pieces that we're looking at this particular issue. Is like, how are these different artists responding to that? And, like for Pink Disco, when creating a theme, we're pretty vague. This last year, we exclusively worked with Major Arcana from the tarot, but it's not as if occult and esoteric practices are certainly part of a personal and subjective part of my experience and part of my creative process, but we're not explicitly or overtly an occult magazine, right? And so to pull out, to put out a call like that and say, hey, respond to these different archetypes and these different tarot, and it's really kind of fascinating because everyone's coming at it from very different angles and different levels of spiritual experience as well. And so yeah, and again, like that's just part of that whole, to me, part of that whole process of let's create something as a community, as a joint venture. I have this idea, I want to create an issue around the devil. What does that mean to you? And how does that communicate with your own thoughts about sexuality or about your body or about what it means to be embodied and to be material and corporeal? Yeah, so I don't know, like it's just been really, really fascinating for me personally, but
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like, you put the call out there, you're inviting this archetype to show up for everybody, and the way that it's embodied will depend on who chooses to contribute and everything.
Right.
And yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So if people are curious about contributing to Pink Disco, do you have any like tips or words of advice for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're open to reading just about anything. We have our guidelines on our website. So if you go to pinkdiscomagazine.com, you can find some just journal submission guidelines. But what I will say is that, we certainly invite pieces that are explicitly or that handle or discuss or illustrate sex and sexuality in an explicit nature, but that's not really what we are. We're not exclusively a pornographic magazine. We're not an erotica publication. And it's not that we discourage that by any means. That's certainly part of the conversation, but I do think that our conversation is much wider. So, sometimes I think that we get a lot of contributions or a lot of submissions that kind of see us or think that we are exclusively an erotic or erotica publication, but really like we're interested in that and how that informs our ideas about what it means to be a human, right? And so as far as like fiction, we want grounded characters, we want realistic characters. In poetry, we want vivid language, we want interesting wordplay, we want interesting ideas that are being expressed. And in art, we invite the same thing visually. And so I would say, like, don't be shy about contributing if you don't feel as if like you're not an erotic artist or an erotic writer. That's totally okay. Not everyone that we publish is, but if it's speaking to something again about that human condition, and part of that human condition is our sexuality, right? And even if it's, even if that is expressed in such a way that, is asexual in nature, like that's still saying something really, really interesting about what it means to exist in a world that is where sexuality is a coded part of the way in which we communicate with one another. And so what does it mean to navigate in that space? And so like, those are the types of questions that I'm always kind of interested in. And I'm just interested to hear from a lot of different points of view and a lot of different ways of expressing that. So anyone who's interested in contributing, please contribute, share your work. What is typically going to get picked up is, are you doing something really, really interesting or subversive or transgressive or nuanced in a way that is different than what I'm typically seeing?
Yeah, right on. Thank you. And yeah, I just want to say there's a lot of talented people listening to this show. I always get, people reaching out to me, like sharing their work and stuff. So I know that there's going to be really talented people listening right now. So this message is for you, whether or not you consider yourself worthy of being published or not. Why not try? So yes.
Totally. And we level of experience is really, as far as writing and publishing and creating art, is not really what we're looking at. Anyone can come from whatever level of experience that you might have, whether or not you're just getting started in your craft or you've been doing it for 20 years. We have writers and artists from all levels of experience contributing to our magazine. So we're totally open to seeing, pretty much anything from anyone. Yeah, it's really great. It's like, as you're probably, I assume that most people probably listening to this podcast have a similar idea, but I just see such a symbiotic relationship between the occult and the esoteric and art, right? They're creative. There's such a creative energy that is required for both. And I think that there's a good reason, historically speaking, why a lot of artists have also been occultists. And there's just such an aesthetic relationship between those two different practices.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for myself personally, my magical and occult practices allow me to sort of access the experiences that I catalog with my artistic practices, I suppose would be a way of describing it.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, very cool. Do you have any last words of advice or any questions that you would like to ask me before I let you go today?
Like I already mentioned, I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity to connect with your audience, and I'm really curious to see what artists out there have to contribute. And so I just want to send that shout out one more time and just saying, please feel free to send work our way. We're very excited to see new work all the time. Yeah, but I think that's about all I got for you, Alexa.
Fuck yeah. Well, where can people find Pink Disco?
Yeah, Pink Disco, you can go to pinkdiscomagazine.com is where our site is located. And then we're also on Instagram, Pink Disco Magazine. We're on Blue Sky and we're on Threads as well.
Okay, right on. And is there anything else that you would like to plug or anything like that while you're here?
Not at the moment, but that those things will probably be coming down the pike. So I would definitely say we got some interesting ideas around the corner. We're going to be introducing like some contests for next year, which will be interesting, and some other things. So just kind of be on the lookout for that. And the other thing I will say is anyone that's interested in Pink Disco Magazine, even if you're not a contributing artist, we also have a running email list. So we try to keep pretty active with that, and just giving our audience, those interested parties, a preview of, typically we offer a preview of a magazine before it's launched, as well as just any news that's coming down the pike as well.
All right, right on. Well, yeah, people should check it out. They can see my spicy devil card video and the images I made and stuff. And yeah, good times.
Awesome.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Lexa. You take care.
You too. All right, thanks so much to Bruce for joining me, and to Pink Disco for including my work in the Devil Card issue. Check out the show notes for a link to that. We're going to be getting back to the rest of my conversation with Harold Roth in just a few minutes here, about the forbidden knowledge of the Book of Enoch. We'll also talk about Moses, name magic, and the grimoire, the magical sword of Moses, and more. After the interview, we'll do listener mail and shoutouts, and I'll do a quick update about what we have going on with the Green Mushroom Project and Void House. We're still collecting submissions for Fuck Around and Find Out Part 3, which is our recipe book. You can find submission guidelines in the show notes. But now, leading us into the rest of my chat with Harold Roth is the audio from the Devil Card video I made for Pink Disco. Since the video contains some light nudity, I will let you go check that out at Pink Disco rather than putting it in the video version of this. Hope you enjoy it. Cheers. This is En Diablo, written on the 26th of November 2024 by Alexa Strada. I am Elias, whose heart is still, yet still I live. I have discovered the secrets of immortality and taken vows to prevent you attaining it. I have corrected the malfunctions which excused your abuse, patched the gaps that in the past gave you quarter. I'll be marching out of the cave's mouth with a horde of vengeful ghosts, and all of your promises having been forsaken, your pacts broken, you'll have no second when we meet at dawn. When the dust is settled, I'll be standing over your headless corpse. I'll have seen the light in your glass eyes go dim and fade away. When the score is settled, all will be at peace. I'll send calla lilies to your lovers, carnations to your friends, marigolds to your family. A profusion of bloom shall open at your wake. Rivers of crocodile tears shall flow. They'll all tell me I've done well in sending you to hell. Then I'll be spitting imprecations in broken Latin over your grave, and, sweet enemy mine, En Diablo, you shall serve me still. An eternity spent of you doing my will. For I am Elias, whose heart is still. So could we talk a little bit more about some of the magic that is in the Book of Enoch? Like what we hit on some of the things. Like what do you think might have been among the more subversive things in there?
Oh, I think definitely the spell work. I mean, I guess it depends on who it's a threat to. Like people were really enormously upset about the calendar because the original calendar of Judaism was solar. So you always had, the quarter days, you always had, any festival always came on the same day every year. And when they were taken to Babylon, what they brought back was a lunar calendar. And the ruckus over that calendar. And in fact, in Judaism, all the months still have Babylonian names. But the problem was that meant that the festivals moved around. Just like this year, Hanukkah is going to be at the end of December. Other times it's been at the beginning. Okay. So it just moves around, and it made a jumble. And in a lot of ways, that kind of fits in with the idea that the watchers left their posts guiding the stars. Because now the stars can just go wherever the hell they want because the angels aren't there. And to us, I think it sounds kind of laughable almost to the people so concerned about a calendar. But that was a big one. And that was the oldest book, the astronomical book. But I think in terms of subversion, there was the very idea of divination, even though, I know that that's been part of Jewish magic, but it was also really important for the Babylonians. And these exorcist priests that they had in their temple, that was their job, was to be able to read all these different natural processes and make predictions, and in particularly of healing people and getting rid of demons and possession and stuff like that. But the critique is a little bit in the book of Enoch is a little bit because the people who came back, or the people who were just looking at what Babylon was, felt that they didn't know what they were doing. They were wrong. And the Babylonian exorcist priests were wrong. And so that's kind of the model of what the watchers teach to a certain extent, that their divination is wrong. But I think the thing that latches on to us now is not foreigners, doing things. Well, who knows? I guess foreigners are a big concern for some people.
You'd think we'd have moved past that, but
doesn't
seem like we have.
3,000 years later, still worried about those darn foreigners. Anyways, and of course, we weren't the only ones who were there. The Greeks were really great at that. But anyways, I think that for us nowadays, probably, we still like divination, although a lot of the types of divination that are described are not, I don't think I've ever heard of anybody I know or have heard of who can divine based on the different sounds of thunder, or based on the different kinds of lightning, or based on volcanoes. Now, maybe people who live in Hawaii, native people, can do something with that. But there are all of these divination practices that they even have their own angel, that brings that particular body of knowledge. But the one that's number one is curse work and making pacts. So that's brought by Shemi Chazah, who's like one of the big shot angels. The other guy, Azael, he brings the metalworking. So like instead of teaching people how to make plows, he teaches them how to make armor and spears and swords. So like this shift from doing anything that would actually help people to making war. So, but I do think that but now we don't really get told how they did these curses, but we know they use divine names, because a side wrap of this is the same story. I think I talk about it in Sword of Moses. Yes. That Moses, when he went to Sinai to get the law, he went up to heaven and the angel said, "What makes you think you can be here? You're filthy. You're polluted. And we're not. We're pure." And he says, "Oh, yeah? Well, who's your mother and father? You can't abide by any of the mitzvot. You don't even have parents." And they were like, "Oh, shit."
So got us there.
Yeah, really. And God said, "That's right." And so from now on, angels have to do what humans say. And you have permission to get them to help you make magic. I mean, it's pretty astounding when you think about it.
Yeah.
I think it is, because I don't think Christians look at it that way. Oh, maybe, I don't know, though. When you think about medieval magic practices, grimoire magic, It
The
seems like
Catholics and the saints have a sort of, it's not the same, but there's kind of some, adjacency, I suppose.
yeah, I mean, they do seem to have, angels who can ask for boons, but I don't know how much of it is because God told them they had to. Honestly, I don't know
Yeah,
that.
I don't know either.
But that does sort of make it all okay. So, in other words, it seems like to me the distinction is the forbidden magic is to do it. It's not even about the curse word. It's about not doing it through God, doing it through some other way. Now, there's nothing to indicate that they used the Nephilim or even that people propitiated the Watchers. Although there are these warnings later, especially like for Metatron, that you not ask Metatron to do things for you or pray to Metatron, okay? Because he's not God.
Leave Metatron alone, okay?
Yeah, really. Back off. But the whole gist, the whole sense that I get from the book is that if you do things through the divine route, if you use divine names, you purify yourself first. That means you're working with angels. So you're pure enough to work with angels. You can do that, and it's no big deal. It's okay. And the Sword of Moses actually even contains death spells.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's all kinds of nastiness in there. It's pretty funny, yeah.
So it's not like you're not allowed to do that. You are allowed, and it's like kind of leaves the whole, there's no, slingshot effect. There's no threefold law. There's nothing like that. The morality is you have to come up with it yourself and make the decisions yourself. But I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose the assumption is like once you've conducted the, I guess it's not that involved. It's like what, 3 days of purity, right? And then, you made yourself worthy to wield the sword, and it's assumed that you'll do it properly, ethically. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's even more trivial than that. It's more like you have to purify yourself because the angels won't work with you otherwise, and they might even kill you. Okay, because they're not nice. They're not like Disney angels.
Sure. Yeah.
They. You know what it really reminds me of is when I read about these Amazonian shamans, the tobacco shamans, who would tell people they had to blow smoke on them. People were asking for cures or whatever. They had to blow tobacco smoke all over them because it was a way of purifying them, because otherwise the spirits didn't want to be around human beings because we smell bad.
That comes up in some Greek stuff too, about like, all these, good smelling incenses and stuff as being a way to like make ourselves less disgusting to the spirits we're trying to work
kind
with.
Of funny.
So,
it does seem to be cross cultures. It
so
makes me wonder, like, is it just spirits have really accurate noses or what? But anyways, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. We have all of these different like arts, astrology, and things like that being taught to us by these like watchers in the Book of Enoch. What type of crossover do you think there is with the demons in the Ars Goetia, for instance, that teach us kind of similar things, or said to be able to teach us similar things?
I don't know, because to me, that's like centuries later and in a different culture. If I feel like, well, I'm sure you know, and you've heard just as I have, that there are people who now no longer compel demons to do anything. They work in partnership with them.
Yeah, I have friends who prefer a more consent-forward type of style of working with the demons. Right. Yes.
And I think that's good, but I think that when you are compelling a spirit, I don't know, it feels like it's getting into dangerous territory. For one,
I don't like to be compelled to you.
Yeah, nobody wants to be compelled. And then if you do compel somebody, they might well think of ways to, get you back.
Sure.
I always remember some I don't know. I guess it's a folktale. I don't know. It's presented as if it was true. Some medieval, or maybe it was Renaissance magician who worked with demons all the time. They found him, and by compelling, okay, they found him literally torn to pieces in his bed. And it was like, see, that's what you get, buddy.
You fuck around and you find out.
You up. Anyways, but the other thing is, well, why shouldn't they just give you a bunch of bullshit? Not even as serious as steering you up. Why, you're asking them for this knowledge. Why shouldn't they just give you some bull? But if you work with them as a partner, and if you go by the idea that I think a lot of people have, is that they're either spirits just running around loose, not aligned with anybody, or they're old gods. So then you really have a different relationship from the beginning towards them. There is no example that I can find in Jewish magic of working with demons positively, except for one that I came across by accident recently. And this was women's magic. And that was that, I take that back, there's another one. But the one that I read that was most interesting to me was in Spain. And when somebody was very sick and the prayers and divine names and everything they tried just didn't work. They would clear all of the names of God and talismans and mezuzot, everything out of the house. And they would set a table for demons with sweet and fatty foods, and ask them to come in and to take away the sickness based on, okay, here's what we're giving you. This is what we will give you if you take away this sickness. And it was women who did this work. It was called an indulka. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but you can see that it's based on the dulka. This based on sugar sweet, because that's what they would do. So that's the only time I've heard of very much of doing work with demons in Jewish magic. But there is also, you've probably heard of the incantation bowls that were found in Iraq and thereabouts. And they usually show, and I always think of these also as women's magic, because they were always found around houses. And some of them were not. Most of them were actually really real words, but some of them were just made up alphabets. But they would almost always show a chained up demon in the center, and often it would be Lilith. But so you could tell her kind of protect the baby. But there were times when they did just the opposite. And so, like, if you think of those bowls as kind of like a focus, a focusing lens, normally they would post them till they stick away from the house, so they keep everything at the corners and they keep everything away. But sometimes they would turn them around and make it so that it was basically cursing the house. And whatever demon they had in the center, the picture, they would just say, go ahead, have at it,
Yeah, here's a little gateway for you. Very interesting.
Yeah. So it's different. In a way, the way that I think later magic, like say up until about maybe 300, there is a lot of adjurations and calling down angels to get them to do things for you. In Jewish magic, it's the main way they're doing magic. And there's a certain amount of compulsion in there because they have to come because God said so. It's not because you say so. So that's one difference. I'm sorry I got off on a thing there.
No, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate it. We talked a little bit about this, but could we get back to the wives in the book of Enoch and unpack a little bit of that gender stuff?
Yeah, that's something nobody has talked about, really. I mean, how could you give your consent? That's the thing that struck me immediately when they say, because they don't say. They say that the angels married women. Oh, really? Did they have weddings? Did they,
Yeah, the older, like, if I recall correctly, I studied ancient Greek, like, ages ago. But I mean, like, the word for marry and, like, copulate and stuff, like, they could be, like, pretty similar, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Now, supposedly, in some way, the angels, the watchers, had to manufacture genitals because they didn't have any, and they weren't humans. They didn't have any need for genitals. And actually, that was part of what they did that was wrong, was that they had no need because they were going to live forever. So in the divine's eyes, well, what do you need children for? But anyway, so they create these genitals and they make themselves look like humans. But how much would an angel look like a human? And if it came to you and said, I want you, would you be able to refuse? Because how terrifying would that be? And then if subsequently, so like from the very beginning, they don't talk about this. There's this aspect of compulsion, and that the rapes that the Nephilim later commit, how far removed are they from what the Watchers do with the human women? It's almost like this hereditary, this gene that they pass on. I thought that was one thing, but okay, let's just say that the wives were like, oh, this is great. You're giving me all this jewelry and shit. You're an angel. Who knows?
Oh, yeah, assuming they're into it for whatever reason.
Yeah, but then you give birth to giants, and that they're not nice. There's nothing nice about the Nephilim. There's nothing you could be proud of about them or love, because I'm sure they wouldn't spare their mothers.
So we already established they're the worst.
Yeah. So it's sort of like you gave birth to children that bring up, because of them, the world's going to be destroyed. I just can't even imagine. Now, some of the discussions because I believe it's the Ethiopic version is the one that even says anything about the wives after they have the Nephilim. And that is that they become sirens. And I thought, what? Why did they say that? But it turns out that word siren didn't necessarily mean what we think of, like Jason and the Argonauts or whatever, where they're women's, these, supernatural kind of women singing on a rock and bringing sailors to their destruction. But rather, they are night creatures, and they haunt ruins. So there's a lot of times there's this weird connection between women, night creatures, and especially owls. And I think that a lot of stuff that say about sirens is about owls. And when you think about the noise that owls make, a lot of times it could sound like a person moaning or crying.
Yeah. The barred owls here make some pretty spooky noises for sure.
Yeah. I love owls. And so that's pretty much all we learn about what happens to them in the end, although another line says that they found peace, which I really like, because certainly that is something that they would deserve after what they had been through. They don't explain what that peace means, but even if you went from, being raped by an angel, and then you have this giant baby and it destroys the world, then, haunting a ruin wouldn't be that bad.
I mean, you're a traumatized individual at that point, most likely. And
Yeah. So I wish there was more. I mean, the only thing is that, like I said, women get more and more singled out as the centuries go by, especially with the rise of Christianity, because it was so Greek and there was so much anti-women attitudes in ancient Greece in certain types of, in their laws and everything, but that it just kind of naturally spread to the early Christians. And it, they just started blaming the women for everything bad that happened, which the Watchers, even to the point where, one of the Watchers brings down armor and spears and swords. And yet, one of the Christian fathers considers the worst thing that the angels brought was makeup and jewelry, because God made it able for women to do, convince men to do bad things. It's just really messed up.
And even that kind of thinking is so problematic. But
No kidding.
It's just
like,
yeah.
Ew,
But these are certainly narratives that are still alive and well today, and that we can sort of see echoing in our own culture in different like facets and stuff. So yeah, thank you for unpacking that with me. I'm hoping if you wouldn't mind, I've kept you for a long time. I'm hoping if you wouldn't mind getting a little bit into the sort of Moses, because we've touched on it a little bit in the divine names, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind commenting on just the aspect of name magic itself and the divine names in particular.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Usually, divine names are formed in particular ways, and how to form them is a kind of a skill that even now you would have to learn by basically oral teachings. So although some of the stuff is out there, and usually they're formed by, let's say, the first and last letter of a sentence in the Hebrew Bible. Go to the next one, take the first and things like that. The last letter of every
word.
They're
like sigils. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And then the how you pronounce them was never, of course, mentioned because that would keep you from being able to use them. But Abraham Abu Lafia, who was he was a rabbi of I can't remember now, it's 1100 or 1300, but he did teach people how to say the Tetragrammaton and to use it to attain prophecy. That was the point. So then you would be able not only to come up with the names, but know how to say them. Okay, so that's one block of information. The Sword of Moses actually has this big, gigantic, the sword. It's big, huge pages of just divine names. And when they say, okay, if you want to kill somebody, use the one that starts here and ends there. And you just go through the manuscript, you'll find that. But the story about Moses, I love Moses, one of my favorite characters in the Bible, because, well, he just went through a lot of shit. He did magic. He was a magician. He was like, but there's a story about him when he's living in Egypt, and he starts hanging around to see what the Hebrews are up to. And they're in a corvée working to help build construction. And he comes on this Egyptian overlord beating the shit out of this Hebrew guy. And he looks this way, Moses does, and he looks that way, and he kills the Egyptian overlord. And we're not really told how he kills him, but the story behind the story is that he used divine names to kill him, because the next day or whenever it is, a few days later, and this story is in the Bible, he scolds these two Hebrews for arguing, and I think they're getting in a fight. And the one guy says to him, "Oh yeah, what are you going to do? Are you going to kill us with your mouth like you did the Egyptian?" So it becomes clear that Moses attained this ability to use divine names to even kill people with. Now, how did he get that? We don't know. They don't tell us. But later, it's clearly something, well, it's your basic, saints always have these extra powers. And by the time he gets to Sinai and, he goes up to heaven, then he gets the massive approval to use all the divine names he wants. But I do like the idea that he was human enough to look both ways before he killed the Egyptian. But he was also saintly enough, or whatever. He was enough of a magician to be able to use divine names to kill him. So it's like a story with two complete aspects combined in it for this individual.
Yeah, I love that.
So I like it for that.
Very cool.
And of course, he never got to see the promised land. So he was like, I don't know. He didn't have very good luck. So I feel like he is one of the most human of the ancestors that are described in the Hebrew Bible. Other ones can seem very opaque, but he seems very human.
Yeah. Right on. Well, Harold, this has been so fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me today. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that we haven't gotten to yet, or are there any questions that you would like to ask me?
How did you like either of the Sword of Moses or the Book of Enoch? Did you find them helpful in your own work, or did it make you think of other things that you might want to try?
Yeah, I really enjoyed both of them. The topic of name magic, as I mentioned before we started recording, this is something that is a huge topic of interest to me, and kind of hearing your analysis of the Sword of Moses was really helpful. I really enjoyed kind of like hearing you unpack like the research that you did and everything. And the same thing with Book of Enoch. So what people can kind of expect from these is not just like the information, but sort of like your analysis and your journey through, the research that you did. So yeah, I thought that they were both really cool and interesting and yeah, helpful. I definitely found things in there that were useful to me. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. One thing I didn't mention was I do think that if Moses was using divine names to kill somebody, he probably used vibrating those names. Because what else? Some people said that he had a sword, a literal sword, and there were names written on there. Another character, Melchizedek, is described to us as having a sword with a divine name, and he used it to kill 990,000 demons. Okay. But to me, it seems more likely that if he was using divine names as a weapon, they would be vibrated, because the way you use them in the sword, they're not necessarily vibrated, but they're definitely spoken aloud. And that reminds me of the Golden Dawn thing. I forget what it's called now. I forget. It's a circle. Okay. You make a circle, and at each of the 4 points, you vibrate a divine name. Like it could be Elohim, Agla, and you do it by using a tone that makes much of your body sort of vibrate. I mean, when I did it, and I did it a few times, and then I quit doing it because it made my eyes hurt. You could actually see the liquid in your eyes shiver. And it wasn't like I was so, talented. It was just the very fact of doing it. So to me, that kind of represents how powerful it could be, which of course makes me think of Dune, right?
Yeah. What you're saying makes total sense to me. Like I mentioned to you earlier, like I'm studying as a vocalist right now and kind of like trying to learn how to unpack all of that. And, as when you're singing, you're literally using your body as the musical instrument, and there's a lot of interesting subtle things there, and playing around with things like the headless, right, or other things that have those barbarous names in them, and kind of really trying to experiment with how to intone them in the way that really like feels the most powerful and like hits the hardest for me physically is I think part of where it's at with name magic, right? There's a sort of physicality to it, like that comes down to like the physics of the sound waves and your body. And it's so interesting. So yeah.
Did you ever think about writing about that?
I have
read
not. Oh, but yeah, I mean, hell, I would absolutely write about that. I spend a lot of time doing production for podcasts and stuff, but I also like to write in my spare time. So maybe I should take some notes. I mean, I have my personal journals and stuff on it, so there's notes. So
cool. Yeah, I think people would be interested. I don't think I've ever seen any writing about that.
Really? Okay. Well, I would be happy to share my thoughts. Hell yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, Harold, this has been so fun. Where can people find your work?
They can find it at my website, which is haroldroth.com. I have my books there. I have my art there. I used to give classes. I don't know. I might do that again sometime in the future about the Enoch book. I'm not sure. But also, of course, my books on Amazon and stuff like that. Your local occult bookshop. If you buy them from me, I will sign them for you. Cool. To you. Yeah. So, so that's pretty much. And I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Reddit. I'm on Twitter still, I don't post around there very much, but yep, I'm around.
Awesome. Well, I'll have you send me some links and I'll put those in the show notes so people can find you and everything. Well, if
Okay.
you wouldn't mind leaving the listeners and I with some last thoughts or words of advice or something like that.
I would say don't listen too hard to people who talk about you have to do a certain kind of magic in order for you to be an okay human being. Human beings have always done bad things as well as good things. And I'm a firm believer in what some people call gray magic, or the twisted path, the crooked path, that you go first one way and then another. And that there's not like one straight road, which is the only way to go. So that's to me has been the one thing that I've felt was the most important for me, to just keep trying, and there you go. That's it.
I love that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me here. It was a great opportunity for me to shoot my mouth off.
Oh no, this has been fantastic. And yeah, hopefully you'd be willing to come back sometime in the future.
Oh, I sure would. I sure would.
All right, thanks so much to Harold Roth for joining me. I've been wanting to chat with him about sort of Moses and name magic and stuff for a while, so I really love getting into the biblical stuff with Book of Enoch too. There's a lot to unpack there. And we didn't even get into the plant stuff that Harold has written about, which is also a topic of interest of mine. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts about the forbidden knowledge of the Book of Enoch or anything that we talked about today. You can go ahead and reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod or on Blue Sky at luxastrata, LUXASTRATA. And you can, of course, find Harold at haroldroth.com, and you will find links to that stuff in the show notes. All right, I'm going to give you a quick update about the Green Mushroom Project and tell you about Fuck Around and Find Out Part 3, which is a recipe book that we are putting together. But first, let's go ahead and do listener mail and shoutouts. Shout out and much love to all the Pocket Wizards and Mushrotters. It's always such a chill experience interacting with you all. I've really appreciated some of our conversations about Satanism, name magic, and more recently. Fuck yar, resist, and non-servium. Thanks so much to June, Donnie, James, and everybody else who's reached out with kind words and New Year's wishes. Greetings to Nicole, who, in addition to saying some very sweet things about the show, asked a question about how I do bibliomancy. I answered that it's usually sort of by feel, that there will be a subtle physical indication which lets me know that I've arrived at the needed passage when I have the book in my hands and I'm flipping through it. I figure out which book that I'm going to choose by rolling dice and consulting my roll tables, which are very much like a roll table that you would find in like a tabletop role-playing game like Call of Cthulhu or Dungeons & Dragons or whatever. If you'd like to get a bibliomancy reading from me, you can do so by joining my Patreon and then messaging me when you have a question for the Oracle. Thanks so much to everybody who is making the show possible by supporting it there. Thanks also to everybody who has reached out and who's been supporting the show by rating, reviewing, and giving on Buy Me a Coffee. Spreading the word by posting about it on social media or telling people you know about it is also a huge help, so gratitude to everybody who is doing that as well. Thanks also to everybody who reached out about the most recent episode, the bonus episode featuring Alan Greenfield. I know that this is an interesting topic that a lot of people are curious about. The whole UAP, UFO lore thing is something that is a rich and varied tapestry, so it's been interesting to hear people's feedback about that one. Whether or not it was featured, know that all of the missives I receive are appreciated. If you'd like to send me thoughts, questions, comments, or suggestions, you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod, or on Blue Sky at luxastrata, LUXASTRATA. All right, fuck yeah. Lots of fun and free activities going on the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Machine Hypho Sigil Project and Void House. Join us for our weekly Fungal Friday chats about a variety of magical topics. We've also got book clubs, as well as special events and ceremonies and seasonal celebrations. I think we're doing a healing ritual this week. Green Mushroom Project is an ongoing magical working based on the metaphor of the relationship some fungi share with some plants. In a nutshell, if we, the magical practitioners of Green Mushroom Hypho Sigil Project, are like a forest of trees, the mushroom current connects us and strengthens us in unseen ways. In addition to the mycelial web which connects us, there are the spores of the mushroom, which are little packets of the current's energy which can be applied to situations as needed by participants. Some people think about them as being little micro-servitors. Our newest experiment, Void House, is about investigating the healing and alchemical properties of consent, providing consent education to magically inclined people, and organizing consent-forward magical spaces for doing group work both in person and online. We're also collecting submissions for our third offering of collected work, Fuck Around and Find Out Part 3, Sorceress Recipes for Resistance, Resilience, and More from the Green Mushroom Project. Deadline to submit to that is February 14th, and see the details in the show notes. I'm really stoked about the recipes I'm submitting. One is for a really good vegan mushroom pot roast. One is for an essential oil spray I created for my work with Saturn and Hecate, which has become a sort of staple in my practice these last, 2 or 3 years. And one is for the fake blood of your enemies, which is something I created for doing a spooky season glamour magic project with some photography stuff. And I thought other people might enjoy playing around with this recipe as well. I'm guessing that you have some fun stuff that you make as part of your magical or spiritual or artistic or whatever practice. You can find the submission guidelines in the show notes if you'd like to share that tastiness with us, and please do. The deadline is Valentine's Day, so don't delay. As always, much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, regardless of what that looks like for you in your practice. It's been such an honor and such a privilege to be sharing this journey with you all. The idea of consent being a central guiding philosophical principle to group magical work, as well as providing education about the nuances of consent to magically inclined people, is something that I and others are really stoked about. And I feel incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to be working on this project. Shout out to the Consent Academy for the awesome work they do, and thank you so much to everybody who has been assisting with our efforts and who has been showing so much enthusiasm for this way of doing things. Gratitude. All right, I will bid you a fond farewell here, before which I will share the Green Mushroom Project Statement of Resistance. Whatever it looks like for you in your life, let me remind you to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Harold Roth and to Bruce from Pink Disco Magazine for joining me. Check out the show notes for links to all of the awesome stuff that we talked about today. Thank you so much for all the kind words and support for the show and my other work that people have been sharing. I really appreciate the help from both seen and unseen sources. Gratitude, Void, and Hail Hecate. Most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. This is Lux Estrada, reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious.
Luxicult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.